we're so not going to talk about packages.
Metrics are not a solved problem.
Metrics are not a solved problem. All right, so yeah, that's what this panel is about. It's about metrics, it's about measurement, novel ideas. Little ideas. It's bad material, man. It's terrible. So why don't, yeah, just real quick, let's get some introductions. Oh, I'm John, and I'm moderating this panel.
I'm Andrew Schaefer. You might have heard me earlier.
That was a good one. I'm Laurie. I'm from the UK, where Laurie is an acceptable name for a guy. So if you're expecting a woman, I'm sorry. It's just me. And I work for Etsy.
I'm Brian Dole. I work for New Relic, app performance management tool. So we provide some of those metrics, and I love our intro music to this talk.
Vladimir Vuksan. I work for, interesting enough, Broadcom, but I do a lot of Ganglia development.
Hey, I'm Patrick Dubois. It feels a bit strange to be on this panel because I'm not actually monitoring a metrics guru, but I'm very interested in the human side and what we can predict based on the technical metrics, so that's why I'm here.
I got mine. I'm Alexei. I'm with Datadog. I'm from France originally, where Alexis is an acceptable first name for guys. And so what we do is a service that aggregates and correlates metrics and events.
Okay, so we're at DevOpsDays, right? And we're talking about the full stack. We're talking about the getting from development all the way through operations, maybe even beyond here. How does that apply to metrics, right? So my first question, starting with you down the end, in various places, and it doesn't have to be where you work right now, it doesn't have to be what you're working on right now, but it has to just with your experience. Organizations that you've worked in, have you worked in organizations where developers didn't have access to graphs, or didn't have the ability to create the graphs, or any of the other metrics, and how have you seen that played out?
So I've totally worked in environments where only operations had access to graphs and to sort of performance data, and developers were basically left in the dark. And it's really hard, basically. Obviously, so you're writing the code, and then you're kind of throwing it over the wall, and it runs, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. All you're going to hear is just people bitching if it doesn't work. And so that's because you have no tangible data to discuss. So what's left is just anger, and it's just terrible because it gets worse and worse. So that's one of the reasons we started Datadog. But also, I'm really glad to see in the field like a lot of open source tools like Graphite, like Ganglia, where developers are the ones who really create the interesting metrics, right? Because if you look at your traditional, ops dashboard, you have stuff like CPU load, etc. So it's kind of interesting, but to the business, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because now you have maybe 200 machines, 500 machines. So if you have, a CPU or load on one of the nodes and it's spiking up, what does it mean to the business in general? The interesting metrics are sort of higher up the stack, in my opinion. I think they're with the developer. They're with measuring what makes your business different from other business. You're measuring how much money you're making, how many customers you're serving. That's really the metrics that matter. And it's that knowledge typically resides with developers. So I think it's critical. I can't conceive of another way to actually run, even though I've been in situations where it wasn't the case.
So actually, I've seen within an organization having multiple monitoring systems. So the guys in dev, they wanted to know when something was happening, but they were using a different system than the guys in ops because they were not notified, and they did want to know because maybe they relied on something during their tests. And the guys in QA, they had their own monitoring system while doing load testing to see what's happening on the system. So it wasn't because there was no intent to share the information, but it's just that they happen to work within their own world with their own tool set that they're like used to. So it's a shame that this is the way it was, but I take away from it that there is a will actually to have all that data, and that everybody's like, when you share it with other people, they're happy to take it on and extend on it.
In my case, actually, I've seen sort of an evolution where I was primarily the user of graphs or metrics, and then over the last couple of years, it was kind of almost at a glacial speed. Developers were starting to look at graphs, and it seems to coincide with developers doing deployments or initiating deployments. So then they're on the hook to actually make sure that things are running. And I'm more of in a support role, providing tools, maybe looking for areas where they're not propagating proper metrics, because I think that there is a lot of value in ops people looking over some of the metrics that developers provide, because sometimes they miss out some obvious ones that down the line you're like, oh, we should have had that. We should have had the queue size monitored. So that's it.
Yeah, to that point, I think one of the things that you asked actually was interesting was have developers, do they have the rights to create the graphs? And I think we're kind of to the point now where it's kind of useless to think about those things, right? So a system has particular features that are interesting. Those are probably the same things that we're all interested in. So the system that is monitoring these other systems should inherently know the value that this service provides and actually provide those graphs for you. So a lot of our customers just move way too fast to have to stop and think about all the things they might want to monitor. And so we believe very strongly that should be an automated process, that the system should know automatically what to graph, and you might add things to that. But having those opinions ahead of time and knowing what to graph gives you that 80-20. We're going to give you most of what you want without having to think too hard about that.
At my last place, I'm a guy who likes to graph everything. I actually have the top hit on Google for if it moves, graph it. And so in my last place, I was always waving my hands around saying, it's just everything, let's make graphs for everything. And I was the only guy who was, at least for the developers, who really wanted to do that. And so it really surprised me when I joined Etsy, and because they've written things like StatsD, where they can write their own metrics. Like, we don't have to even think about them doing it, because they have hooks in all the PHP stuff, and they just add graphs as they like, and they all appear in Graphite, and which is really fantastic, because even if it doesn't move, you should graph it. You should graph everything.
So the president is not evenly distributed, and we're kind of on the leading edge of a lot of things.
Yeah.
And while you asked the question about developers having access to graphs, having seen many things, and the names will be changed to protect the guilty, but there's plenty of places where operations doesn't have graphs.
This is true. This is true. It was a very leading question. And I live in a bubble. So that's where the question comes from.
It's a fun bubble.
It's an awesome bubble.
Yeah,
You guys are in the bubble with me.
Hey, John. John,
Yeah.
can I ask a question back here?
Yeah, yes.
Hey, what happens when you have developers that have access to tons of graphs and you can't get them to look at any of them, and they don't care? So, I mean, that's kind of one of the big challenges I have, is like philosophically the developers don't believe that that's even part of their job, and I don't think that's the case at Velocity. I don't think most of the people in this room or at Velocity, that's the way they think, but where I'm at, that's the way they think. And at least
That's outside the bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, well, this is videotaped, but
Yeah. It's a
But,
fair point.
I mean, you know, has anybody struggled with that, and how do you get them to realize that it's part of their job, and the business metric, all of that is part of their job, and it isn't just huck it over the wall and it's
Can
our
I
job.
answer that?
Sure.
Actually, I was in an organization where that was part of a developer job description. You know, you deploy it, you monitor it, you fix it. So there was a schedule actually where developers were on a weekly monitoring duty, and they were in charge of reviewing graphs daily or during the day a couple times, make sure, and then if something was off, they were the ones that were supposed to look at what's wrong and drill down, and if they had any questions, they would have to ask some of the other developers, but somebody was responsible. And then if somebody didn't notice something, then the CTO would come down and say, well, what happened?
I suspect if you make them wear pagers, they'll get more interested.
True.
Can I just real quick before, these are all good questions. I want to just quickly ask, how many people maintain or build graphic systems or other metrics collection pieces, Splunk, that sort of thing, where ops only has access to it? Okay, great. For all, how many people own, maintain all that stuff where developers actually contribute to it? All right. Okay, just wanted to get some sort of context here.
I think another answer to that question is dashboards. Like, create them, or even let developers create them, and buy lots of big screens and put them around the office and shove them in their face. Because once they realize the value of them, it just spirals into the right direction.
And one further thought too, I think half the problem is just the level of abstraction. So from an engineering standpoint, if I'm working as an engineer on a system, I really don't care ever what the CPU load is on a system. But I do care that my throughput is causing that, right? So it's really, is it the right information for me to care? And then I think I care deeper about where that's coming from.
Yes, so I find it strange to say I provided it to ops, to the development group, and they're doing nothing with it. So you can put the blame on them, but you can ask yourself the question, what can I do to improve, to have them look at it? I know it seems like maybe a subtle difference, but it's like changing things like the dashboard, providing them what actually they require in their job, and not just providing the raw data and let them figure out what they can do with it. So I think we have a role in operations to provide that to them. So.
I've got a comment on that and a question. So my comment is, if you're monitoring enough stuff, any change, any code a developer writes should manifest like in a graph, and that should be something that they should want to share with their peers and their bosses. So it's not monitoring, cannot be a duty that you're monitoring this week. You want to monitor more so that your changes, your features get more registrations, more lower CPU load, your algorithm works better. So that's how I'd incentivize devs to look at graphs. My question is about monitoring sucking right now. And so we don't know what tool is going to change this, but my question is about keeping every data point, like OpenTSDB, disk is cheap, it's possible, or the kind of RRD, style, lossy, graphite, RRD, Munin, that kind of style, and what you guys think the tool that's going to solve monitoring is going to employ. And I don't think New Relic or Datadog can comment because asking me to pay for more than half an hour of data isn't really in the plan. So, thank you.
So the storage issue is always a contentious part of the monitoring debates. Actually, I think we had heated debates with Stephen about how long should we retain data, and do I really need 15-second sampling from a year ago? I don't. I don't. He does. But so the issue with retaining data is that collecting massive amounts of data is complicated, and you can do it. You could set up something like OpenTSDB, but it's very complicated. You have to have I don't know if it's a Hadoop cluster or something, or HBase. So that's not for everybody. And monitoring systems, there's lots of outfits that for instance use Ganglia. They have 2 or 3 servers, 5 servers. I mean that's why should they have to set up this massive undertaking to just monitor that many servers or that many metrics? It's a tough balance to strike. And yes, disk is cheap, but there is cost to it, management cost. And with RD, you can actually definitely make RD perform very well by pre-allocating a lot of space for it. You'll burn a lot of disk. You can make 5 years worth of 15-second sampling. It's definitely possible, and I think it's a lot easier to manage than OpenTSDB or some of the other systems.
It kind of reminds me of recording every squeak in the universe and trying to sort of something that might make sense of random noise sometimes. If you are collecting so many data that might be useful at a certain time, yeah, but it doesn't make sense to do it with everything. I would rather go for a few very interesting metrics than trying to monitor whatever I can find, because I'm probably not going to look at it anyway. But that's my opinion.
I mean, so even though I've been censored, I'll just have a question and answer. So I think the question really beyond the assumption one makes, and that's common, is like, oh, if I keep the information is in the data, right? If I keep everything, I'll be able to find patterns and so on. So you can go there and you'll pay in terms of complexity of storage and CPU, but I think if you don't have a preconceived idea of what it is that you're looking for, then you have like zillions and zillions of data points. If you don't have a process where you're going to go through the data and you're looking for certain things, so you're going to apply certain types of analyses to it, you're like storing points and you're not doing much with it. So it's really echoing the points, like it makes sense to store at high resolution when you kind of know what you're looking for. Otherwise you give yourself sort of a nice impression that it feels warm, I have all the data, but really I don't have a clear idea of what I'm going to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no disk big enough you can't fill them up, right?
Yeah.
And
fill the disk.
yeah. I think it's not mutually exclusive either. You can keep certain types of data forever, and then you probably get diminishing returns on other types of data.
Yeah.
You can get rid of it.
Who here graphs CPU? Who here graphs database queries? Who here graphs Ethernet frames? At 50-second resolution 10 years ago. Next question.
Speaking of metrics you keep and what you actually refer to or you don't refer to, for your own businesses, what's your own key metric? Like, what's the thing that you load when you come in the morning and you check out, what burst and what didn't? And it might not even be technical. I know I'm actually an Etsy user, and I could see that being more related to your volume of items rather than traffic to the website.
GMS, the turnover of items sold is my thing that I have open all the time. It's a graphite graph because the guys that write the PHP wrote it, so I have it in a tab, and I refresh it, and it goes up and down, and it's all good.
Nice.
The number of items that are listed per minute, relisted per minute, the gross merchandise sales, like Lori said, checkouts, failed checkouts,
Nice.
logins, failed logins, those sorts of things are.
I mean, we have a lot. That's why we have.
Yeah,
that's why we have dashboards. Like we have multiple dashboards with multiple graphs on. So there's lots of them. But for me, the one is GMS. But like John says, we have a dashboard full of graphs that are all important. But
Yeah, at previous jobs we did a lot of ad impressions. So the site was ad supported. So one of the most useful metrics was number of sessions, and per web server. That was the kind of a key one. If that one looked off, then things were not good. Or there was also virtual currency kind of purchasing. That was a big one as well. But right now, I usually look at like CPU utilization. That's that's the one that I like, because it's usually low. So if there's something high on some of the key servers, then that's cause for concern. It just depends. As far as metrics, nobody has the same set of metrics, and you over time you learn what's normal and what's not. I like to look at day view or something week view, because that kind of shows lots of interesting patterns, and over time you learn what a normal pattern is.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, a little bit like Inception, we use, at New Relic, we use New Relic to monitor New Relic. And so we're looking at, for us, end user performance is probably one of the biggest things, and the throughput of that system, and then just, signups and deploys from a business standpoint.
So I think it kind of depends what metrics you look at in the morning. If you're the tech guy having to support the server, you care about like the CPU and the memory. If you're the business guy, you look at the dollars. So it's, I personally think that the higher you go in the levels, the more you spend on the technical side, but the lower is very interesting for diagnostics when things fail at the upper level. So that's kind of getting my take on view on monitoring. So I don't know if that resonates with you.
Lexi, you want something to say?
Yeah, just so we're a very young company, so for us, it's really whether people use the product and how much money we have left in the bank. That's
Those are your. Do you have those on the graph?
not the bank part, because the integration is a total pain.
So there's a couple of questions left before
I just have two quick comments. One was that if you're an engineer in the operations team and you're not also looking at the dollars graph, you're probably not doing your job. The other one, and to do my best, Arthur Bergman, if you were at Velocity 2 days ago, if you're running Ganglia and you're having trouble with RD performance, buy a fucking SSD. Like, seriously, you're wasting your life, buy a fucking SSD. They're cheap and they work really well, and you get 20,000 IOPS and...
Sponsored by Quantum?
Yeah. You have a question?
I do. I'm next.
You do? Oh, you're next. I didn't even notice that we have 2 cores.
I'm Kit Plummer. I'm a software developer.
Hi, Kit.
So that point made, real quick, I hear us, them a little bit.
Yeah.
We're all DevOps.
We are. Sure.
So following that with the question, is there a good way for operations folks and software developers to work together to instrument the code, code specifically, not necessarily systems, but to measure everything from asynchrony to simple performance or other operational or non-functional requirements, best practices, you guys, patterns, things like that?
Where's Kellen? I know. You want to tell them about StatC?
I guess I'm going to fill in for Kellen there. Yeah, Etsy wrote a thing called StatsD. It lets you just push your own metrics, and it's not complicated. You just, like user registrations or anything like that, you just tell it, you just say this event triggered, you put it in the flow of the sign up, for example, and then it pushes to StatsD, and then that flushes out to Graphite. So we have so many metrics, and sometimes they're only relevant to the people themselves, because like the groups developers. Like they create a new feature and they want to instrument that and how people are using it and stuff like that. And then, as someone else pointed out, then they email those graphs around and say, look, we've had X thousand people use this new feature, and they show you a graph of it ramping up, and they love that, and that's the way it should be.
Do you guys do alerting out of that?
There is actually some Nagios alerts that are based on Graphite, yes. For example, checkouts. Like, we want to know that people are still buying stuff. If no one buys anything in 3 minutes, something's wrong. So we know we do that.
And our view is really that it's great that there are a million tools to do this on your own and sort of have the burden in development. Our opinion is we should be instrumenting the language itself, because I don't have any time to write all the lines of code over what might be interesting later. So automatically instrumenting the entire language and having that sent automatically for us, I think is sort of a point of view that I think a lot of people agree with, that it's really just not a burden worth bearing. I want to focus on the feature that I'm delivering, not also having to think about how I might want to monitor that. So we monitor everything and make that available to both operations and development in a single tool.
I'm not sponsored by New Relic, but when I see people using it during their development or testing, it's just so easy. Gem install, a few lines, and they have all the metrics you want. So creating that easiness, just like Blitz.io, go to the website, sign up, and you have load testing. So that's the kind of thing that narrows the gap in a way that it's so easy. It just takes a few clicks, and you all have it. And it used to be hard. They used to have need of knowledge, how to set up ganglia or whatever. This is not their territory, but if you put it in their world of their tools to make it easy to get the graphs, I think that makes the huge difference, because it doesn't matter which tool they're using it's about the graphs and getting the data out, and that makes the difference for me.
So I would say that, so I totally agree. So simple interfaces for where you say this is what I'm measuring, this is the value, this is timestamp, this is if it's a counter or gauge, and so on. So that's I think a very simple interface to it. That's important. I would say that I would add to it that you want to record somewhere what kind of units you're measuring. If it's per second, if it's a number, if it's a the kilobytes or something, because if that gets lost and then you're doing some computation on doing a ratio of two metrics, then you might end up with results that make literally no sense. So the units and trying to document what it is that you're measuring and trying to write it down. So and that's one thing we're trying to I guess through Datadog to develop is a place where you can explain to others, this metric, this is really what it means. This is why I think it's important. I'm a developer, or I'm in ops, or DevOps. So not stop at just the timestamp, the number, so the value and the name, but add metadata to it.
Let's get these questions. I only have 2 more questions anyway, so let's get these questions, and then I want to run through these last ones. These guys are going to be here all day anyway, so. Sure.
So I have a friend of mine. He works at a kind of traditional large organization with inertia and varying degrees of silos and traditions. And what my friend's looking for is a way to measure DevOps adoption itself. So do I graph lunches that developers and sysadmins attended together? Do I graph the percentage of developers that carry pagers? How do you answer the question, hey, that's great that you guys are pursuing this so-called DevOps agenda for a couple of years now, but how do you measure that? How do you quantify it to folks that are a little farther away than we are from what's going on?
Andrew.
I can think of an easy one. So you take your developers, your operations, put them in a room, and you measure the blood pressure.
Anybody want this one?
I think you have an instrumentation problem. Trying to measure.
Microphone.
there's a little bit of an instrumentation problem and then how to interpret it. I'm not sure you can measure some of this.
Well, you're certainly not looking to get a high score in DevOps. That's not really the plan. If it seems like if the company's doing well and people don't hate each other, then you're probably doing pretty well. So just because there are these things, happiness is one of them, that you can't measure on a graph, and that's what you're looking for. That's hard because it's uncomfortable for engineers to think that way.
John, I've seen teams graph that too. Like every day they get together.
Smiley faces.
Kind of sign of faces. How do we feel
Oh,
about
yeah.
that?
Wow.
So
Who's the guy that controls that?
the team that's there. You know.
And does he have kids?
Well, they do it in first grade probably too.
Yeah.
But it's amazing what you get out of it. If you just say, "Oh, why is that red?" and they start discussing, what can we improve? Why is it sad? It gets the word out. So
That's why they're on the panel.
I think it's the far-field effects that are systemic that you are trying to get the benefit, not necessarily whether they went to lunch, but do they see each other as humans? Are they actually going to have a conversation without the siloed worldview dominating the conversation? And metrics like deploys per day in some ways are a reflection of this in some cases, because that's the natural interface. That's the natural interface between those two personalities and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Also, maybe a number of complaints of developers against ops, or vice versa, because that does happen. Developers will complain that ops are in the way. Oh no!
I don't think that's asymmetric. Or I mean, everyone complains, right?
Yeah.
What was it?
Everyone
Everybody
complains.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is actually developers will specifically complain about ops, not doing.
Yeah. And ops having specific complaints about devs.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a 2Y axis.
I don't think that the number of deploys a day is actually a good metric to see it. It could be a kind of result of collaboration, but I think it's a very easily gameable metric.
In isolation,
so
it
we
is.
just do a lot of small changes, and we do it very often, which might be good, but it's also like, the number of servers you monitor. Like I said in my talk yesterday, spin up 1,000 VMs and I'm great. Number of lines of code. I generate code, so So, it's the way I try to find a way, like you are searching for the Holy Grail, like how do you look at it and what do you measure? And the thing that resonated with me was it's like measuring the black hole. Don't look at it specifically, but look at the things around it and draw your conclusion on those things, whether it's actually happening or not. So don't be too focused on counting the number of interactions. Again, like in the talk I said, it doesn't mean that you have a lot of people during the party talking to each other, that it's a good party. So
Hope that helps your friend.
Yeah. Let's get some more questions. Stephen?
So, and I guess I already know the answer for Laurie, but how many of the people on the panel have ever been in a situation where you're monitoring something which has an annual cycle? So, for example, an example might be selling something which goes up and down according to Valentine's Day or Christmas or Thanksgiving. If you've done that, how happy would you be if the granularity of your metrics just now were radically different from 1 year ago and basically didn't exist 2 years ago? That's what I really mean by making sure we have same granularity of data all the way across. Do you think that's sane, or am I missing something?
Sorry, I'm going to go ahead. Somebody else can take it. No, you can take it. Having accurate numbers, right, on a granularity can change and still not have loss. So you can have daily numbers of sales per day that will remain accurate for the end of time. But do I care about, the question is, do I care about what were sales per second between 12:35 and 12:36
So
on
definitely
December
not.
17th. I mean, what I'm saying is that I believe that the value there does diminish over time, and absolutely long-term trending is paramount. That I wouldn't say that throwing away data is a good idea in any sense, but in the same way that we all we all trade off efficiency and thoroughness, right? The same with metrics data. That's the end of the moderator answering a question.
What you're actually asking is a signal processing question.
Yes.
And you're trying to reconstruct a function which you set up has a very long period. So you're going to maybe lose those high frequency changes, but they're possibly noise in that system. So if you can reconstruct the trend over that function and the curve at the level that it matters, then you don't need to have that same level of granularity, and you'll be just fine.
Well, I've sort of addressed it earlier, but I agree with John that it's not. You want to look at the overall trend, but if you think that it's valuable to have that level of sampling, I mean that's fine too. I mean I don't think all of us have the same problem, or that necessarily one solution fits all. So if it makes you happy to have all those data points, hey,
It's all about
more
you,
power
Steven.
too.
It's all about you.
Yeah. It's all about you.
Okay, that's a good segue. Do you have one more question? Did you have?
Sure, quick one. I love graphs and metrics. I made a graph to track the number of graphs that I have.
Me too.
Yeah. Question is about graphing or metrics about community. So I guess most people in the room are building websites. Websites are used by people. People make communities. Have you got any thoughts about how to measure the interaction with the community of the site?
You could trend on forums. You could trend on. There's lots of ways.
Etsy does that. Forum posts. Anything else?
Favorites?
Favorites. People favoriting things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are cool.
Kind of qualitative.
And actually,
There is-
a good point there is it's not only a graph to make sure that people are still there and care, but if there's a sudden massive spike in people posting, there's a reason for that, and it means that this isn't just about dev as well. Like even our support team, like we have a huge support team, and they all have access to the graphs as well. And so they're looking at them as we have a dashboard for them as well, so they can see how many forum posts they've been, and if they can see a spike and something's happened, they can dig in to find out why. And in fact, sometimes they can tell us about problems.
So, next question, and related to the excellent segue that you unknowingly gave. So, did anybody see John Rouser's talk, and either of them at Velocity? I want to be John Rouser. He gave some talk about statistics and looking at your data in ways that aren't sort of traditional. My question is, as systems administration, web operations, and as these disciplines become more, grow, right? How do we ensure that our tribe, which has varying educations, okay? Not everybody has a computer science degree. Some people have art degrees, and they're the best ops guys I know. How do we instill the ideas and the sort of the concepts of signal analysis and statistics and that sort of thing? And is there? My gut feeling is that there may be a lack of some pretty basic things, not hard to understand. It's just that nobody told these guys that these were important, right? Unless you've managed an ISP, unless you've paid the bill for an ISP, you might not know what a percentile is, right? So my question to the panel is that how did you guys even know about these concepts? And what can we do? What do you think we could do as a community to encourage people to learn about these things that are obviously very important in our roles?
So my background is in math, so that made that easy. I think that we live in a wonderful time, and there's really two parts to this. So one is getting people engaged to want to go learn this stuff, because people will learn things that they want to. But we happen to live where, in a time when if you have an internet connection, you can go online and you can watch the best lectures on statistics, on linear algebra, from people at MIT, from people at Stanford. And so I think if you can realize that, then you just have to create the incentive or the desire to pursue it. And I think this is part of DevOps culture, but and also, you know, we have a global tribe, but you have the local tribe. Mm-hmm. And if you can create a culture of learning where, and not oh, you don't know that's signal processing or whatever, but just like, oh, there's this cool thing, and if you do this math, then all of a sudden you get magic, and you can, you know, like the stuff we were looking at on the Poisson modeling, mm-hmm. Confidence intervals that Kellen showed yesterday. There's a lot of things that you can get. I think, so let me actually make another comment. This is about the way education is presented. I think that there's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, very early in their lives were told they weren't good at math. And now that did them a disservice, because it's not that they weren't good at math, it's often that they weren't prepared for the math that they were being presented. Mm-hmm. And that by just going back and building up that foundation, there's a lot of things that just become possible that you can unlock, and all that stuff is there right in front of you. If you want the information, you know, Google OpenCourseWare, it's all there.
I think as a tool maker, we definitely share some of the responsibility. Up until recently, or if you look at a lot of graphs in the industry, so you see a graph and, you know, that's kind of it. You see just colors and lines. There's very little context provided to it. There's very little explanation. So I think if we start building tools that, so you put the data because that's a representation that we're used to consuming, and then we can hint at basically instill curiosity in the data. You know, put next to it maybe a little distribution, so we can see if it's normal, not normal, and, you know, have links. You could link to, like, Wikipedia, or okay, what is the distribution? To really just, because I think especially in this audience, everybody's curious. What all we need to give you is you know, little sort of handles to get started, and then I think it's going to follow. So
just follow the breadcrumbs home.
I always find it, there is this desire when you see 3 dots like this that you would draw a line out of it. But it could be like this and you wouldn't know. So I see somewhere a danger when you approach it only at math ways, because it's like the black swan. It's not because you see a trend that the next thing is going to be on
that's
the same.
That's signal processing too.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guess I need some.
Yeah, I do also have some background in math, but I'm sort of hesitant to suggest that, you know, everybody should do like statistical analysis, because it is tricky. So I don't know. I'm sort of on a not really sure if I think there's, you know, concepts like percentiles, you know, 90th percentile. I think that's a, you know, very easy concept to understand. And, you know, everybody should know what it is. Some of the other more esoteric statistical concepts, I don't know if they're necessarily necessary for, you know, for you to do your job, and you can definitely screw it up. So, I don't know. I'm on a fence.
So you're on the fence of people knowing.
Not knowing. Well,
so there's
I'm on
a
a
problem
fence
with
that people
certain...
might misapply the concepts.
Yes, yes.
you can build all sorts of models, and they will give you a number. That doesn't mean that you have any usable information or insight.
True. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that doesn't mean you shouldn't learn how to build a model.
Word.
I'm just saying it might give you false confidence or not confidence. I'm just trying to be more measured or more careful how it's used.
Yeah, kind of following that point, actually, I think there are lots of ways to model the data in the systems that we have to collect them, and I think that just like clever code should be avoided if there's a simpler way, I think the same is true for analysis of that data. And if there's a really clever way to comprehend a massive amount of data that is going to be harder to comprehend for a broader audience, that's a problem. It's something that we struggle with, is really sort of having the type of statistics that people want to see, where not all of our audience would really understand that. And it's kind of a fine line to apply something that's broadly applicable to everyone who's consuming that data. So I think if it can be really simply understood, and this comes from an engineer who has an art degree, so.
Well, actually, I'll continue on this because I just remember, like in a lot of the courtrooms when they explain the DNA, fingerprinting, and it just seems like it goes over most people's heads because it's just so complicated. So I think we should just stick to simple concepts, that are very easily comprehensible or comprehensible, instead of going for this complicated things. Histograms that John Reiser showed. I mean that's fairly easy to comprehend, I think. But.
So Damon Edwards is telling me to wrap it up. Who's hungry? So why don't we just take just a couple more questions? All right.
I just wanted to say that I agree that a lot of this falls into the tool makers, where like RD tool is basically the only thing that does even available like Holt-Winters analysis and smoothing, and like what is on the roadmap for StatsD to automatically provide analysis in maybe like a couple of commonly understood like statistical models that may be useful interpretations of data.
Mm-hmm. We're patching Graphite to have Holtzman scale in it.
Okay, I mean, like I'm stuck on Zabbix at my job, and like it's terrible, but it provides like nothing. But look at StatsD, it's a raw data collector. It's there. If it can, or I guess you need something that can look into the history, but other than Holt-Winters, what even other methods are recognized as useful in general in operations graphs? I mean, Baron Schwartz gave a really great talk, where like he went into it a little bit on universal scalability theorem and stuff, and these are like concepts that don't have a lot of press, and they're not making it into tools, and so education isn't going to be there. Personally, I see it as a huge, huge gap. You have 30,000 graphs. What the hell good are they? They don't mean anything. Your ability to interpret them comes from years and years of experience, but you need a pointed automatic way to say like this shape means something.
I mean, I don't know if I would actually do anything in StatsD. I would just keep it simple. In Unix fashion. Have it collect basic data, and then have another tool that does the analysis that is useful, so that we could actually plug and play with different tools. I don't think we should complicate any real. Sure, right.
Yeah.
So to his point, you don't necessarily want lots of data, you want insight. And I'm going to argue a little bit with Vladimir. It's not, everyone doesn't have to do all the statistical analysis, but if you have someone who's good at it, there's lots of hard problems in computer science. I don't necessarily have to solve all of them, but I'm glad someone's going to do that. They wrote a library, I can use that. And being able to have just the basic concepts and access to those ideas, and then be able to leverage that, doesn't mean that you can go and implement it. And that's still open to you, and you should take advantage of it.
Another question?
Yeah, I have the feeling that something is missing in the metrics and measure part of our job. Is that we take measures, but we don't measure errors in the measures. And most of the time, we don't know whether the data are still valid if we use them within the range of validity and confidence we have in them. And I have the impression that there's a space where we can improve the tools. And also, as you say, maybe we can have tools that can get the graphs and do what we do most of the time, is that compare the graph of that machine or that service with another similar service, or the same service but different day, and just tell us when there's something that is different, that is statistically different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a lot of missing tool in that space.
There is a latent opportunity to solve some of these problems.
The bar is low. Get to work. Patch is
Andrew's
welcome.
volunteering.
Hi. So I work at Yammer, where we have a JVM-based metrics library that was recently deployed. You might have heard Coda Hale talking about it.
Coda.
We basically went overnight from like a couple dozen metrics in Ganglia to several thousand. So I just want to say thank you to Vladimir for the new Ganglia UI. You saved me. No, that was all.
Was there any other questions? No? Thanks
Does
for
anyone use
talking about
Does anyone use R for this stuff?
A what?
R? For the hard stuff, for like the math, for the hard stuff. Okay, thanks everybody. Oh wait, no wait, Mandy. Go, Mandy.
Okay, I don't want to take any more time, but if anybody wants to talk tomorrow about taking metrics and measurement and adding, so there's a lot of trees here, built some fantastic trees, but there's a whole fucking forest that relates to the rest of your business. So if anybody wants to talk tomorrow about using these metrics, bubbling them up, making business sense out of them, using them with your marketing team, that sort of thing, I would be interested in talking to people about that kind of stuff. So maybe we can have a discussion about that tomorrow.
So maybe I can add to that. So tomorrow is going to be open spaces. At the end of the conference, we're going to put up a board where you can post IDs for sessions for tomorrow. And the idea is that after, let's say, the last session, that people can come up here on stage and like present what they would like to see addressed in their session for tomorrow. So you can start thinking about the session you want to do tomorrow, on what you're passionate about. Maybe packaging, I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.